People say, well, what about George Washington? Because he's touted as such a man of integrity. Matter of fact, there's records that he attended church regularly, a Christian church. There's also records that he and his pastor, there's letters that have been written. Matter of fact, Library of Congress is a prime field to be picking truthful pieces of fruit. You want to get fruitful research? Hey, go to the Library of Congress. What we find out is that the pastor, one of Washington's pastors, he said that overall he spoke with Washington time and time again that Washington was a deist. Okay, Washington didn't want to have a problem with the guy. He wanted to continue going to the church because it was a political move. But in reality, Washington said he was a deist. They went back and forth on this matter. This has been documented historically. He was not a Christian. He was definitely a deist. Now, others will argue that Washington renounced the Masonic Lodge. Well, that's only a half-truth. Okay, he renounced the British Lodge. See, when he came over and started setting things up, like in this new era, if you will, he had to renounce the old to become part of the new. And so he was actually part of the Alexandrian Lodge. I forget the exact number of the lodge, but if you Google this, you're going to find out exactly which lodge Washington was a part of in Virginia. I think it might have been Lodge 122, but I forget. I don't want to quote that, but he renounced the British, joined on with the current lodge that was setting up in the New World. They were two separate systems. Now, they were very similar, but they were separate. Matter of fact, their idea was to come and set up a government here that was almost identical to the oligarchy that they left. See, most people don't realize that. They don't realize that Washington was part of a grand conspiracy to create basically a new oligarchy here, a government controlled by a few. And that's all historical. We document that in our film. But the idea was to set that up, but to give more freedoms. But it still allowed the elite to run everything that the government wants. Any move of the government, the elite were going to be involved. They were not going to allow the common man to make decisions. Matter of fact, when the Constitution and some of the founding documents were signed, those windows were locked. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis from the Pentagon, he came on record and he talked to us about this for the film. He points to the fact that the founding fathers were a deep state, which we would call shadow government. Back to Washington. Washington was definitely a Freemason. Matter of fact, they cast sprigs of acacia at his Masonic funeral to signify him going on to the land of Osiris in the underworld. Now, they believed Osiris was already in the underworld, and they believed that Washington was the America's first Osiris, but he wasn't meant to be the final. He was meant to be a type. And we see that in how they went down and went through with his funeral. As a matter of fact, if you go back and study the death and the funerals of Washington, you're going to find out that there were two. You had two different eulogies. You want to look for the Masonic eulogy that was presented by Timothy Bigelow Jr. That literally paints the picture. Look, Washington was not just a porch mason, okay? He knew what he was doing. He was very much invested in this. We have evidence that not only was he a mason, but he was a mason in good standing all the way up until his death. A lot of people say he renounced the lodge. Again, he did, but it was the British Lodge, not the American Lodge. What's crazy about this is that he was literally being set up in a system that was a religious system that was set up to bring about the spirit of Osiris, a resurrected spirit, a reincarnated spirit, if you will, of Osiris, to possess the ruler of this nation. Washington never made it to the crypt. They did not put him in the crypt that they built for him because we believe they didn't build it for him. They said they did. But it's kind of like the government says that they're building, these military bases, and then immediately they retire the military base after they build it because they had other plans for it. The government does this all the time. They set up the crypt of Washington. They installed it very much strategically, which we break down all the strategy involved here. The crypt of Washington is sitting at it's a basement level of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. This is literally a page out of ancient Egyptian magic. We break this down step by step by step in the film. We show everything, how you go up and you walk into the Capitol building. You look up and what do you see in the dome? You see this thing called the apotheosis of George Washington. Now, if he really was a Christian like so many people say, all you gotta do is look up and see the heaven that George Washington is ascending into, which is painted on this massive mural, and he's surrounded by all the pagan gods. You say, well, why on earth, if Washington was a Christian, why would he be getting deified in the first place into a god? That's what the word apotheosis means. Literally, Washington becoming a god. Walt Whitman, the famous American poet, said that George Washington was becoming the Osiris. Now, pagan gods, what does this have to do with DC? Well, Thomas Jefferson literally designed the city to honor the old pantheon of pagan gods. This is on record at the Library of Congress. People can investigate what's called the most approved plan. They literally built this city to pull a line from the Ghostbusters, how they talk about drawing down the power on these certain buildings, cursed buildings, buildings that are set up for drawing down occult power. The city of DC literally was built as a massive ritualistic chessboard to do public rituals